The last American troops were withdrawn from the Philippines in 1992. The withdrawal came after the Philippine Senate rejected a treaty that would have extended the stay of US troops in that country. The decision to remove these troops was a result of growing nationalist sentiment in the Philippines. There were nationwide protests across the streets in opposition to the continued presence of foreign military bases on Philippine soil. But these protests had begun years earlier. They were carried out by various nationalist and left-wing groups. It started off as a call to depose the Philippines' longtime ruler, Ferdinand Marcos. It was a national outcry against the widespread human rights abuses and the rampant corruption that was committed during his regime. Marcos was ousted in 1986 and his family had to flee the country. Anger against Marcos then became anger against the American troops that were stationed in Philippines because the United States had been a long-time backer of the Marcoses. Even their family had to seek refuge in America, angering many Filipinos. As the situation in the Philippines became more and more unstable in the late 80s and early 90s, the United States came under increasing pressure from its allies as well as human rights groups to withdraw its support for Marcos and support a transition to a more democratic government. Ultimately, the United States decided to withdraw its support for Marcos's government and threw its weight behind a peaceful transition to a new government. This paved the way for the rise of Corazon Aquino as the country's new president. It was the return of democracy after 20 years of autocratic rule. Today, 30 years later, Marcos's son, Ferdinand Marcos Jr, is the country's new president, and his government has taken a landmark decision to have 4 new American military bases in the country. The reason? The growing threat from China and the possibility of a Chinese attack on Taiwan. The northernmost Philippine islands are barely 100 miles away from Taiwan. On Crux Decode, what will this decision mean for changing geopolitical equations in the Indo-Pacific? Will US troops in the Philippines deter China from attacking Taiwan? And most importantly, can Marcos Jr. succeed where his father failed? The United States is increasing its military presence in the Philippines. It's now managed to gain access to 4 more military sites for stationing its troops. This will now strengthen the role of the Philippines if ever a conflict were to break out between China and Taiwan. The agreement announced last week allows Washington to station military equipment as well as build facilities in 9 different locations across the Philippines. This is the first time in 30 years that the United States will have such a large military presence in the Philippines. The deal comes as Washington has tried to reaffirm its influence in the Indo-Pacific. There is also a broader effort to try and counter Chinese aggression. The US has been trying to reinforce its traditional partnerships with treaty allies like Japan and South Korea. It's also been finding new ones like India as part of the Quad initiative, which also has Japan and Australia. Fears have grown manifold over a possible Chinese invasion of Taiwan. An American general even went to the extent of predicting that war would break out between Beijing and Washington in 2025. Among the 5 treaty allies which the United States has in Asia, the Philippines and Japan are the most geographically closest to Taiwan. In fact, the Philippines' northernmost island of Itbayat is less than 100 miles away from Taiwan. Predictably, China's foreign ministry has accused the US of threatening regional peace and stability with this announcement. This is what the MOFA statement said, and I quote, "Out of self-interest, the United States continues to strengthen its military deployment in the region with a zero-sum mentality that is exacerbating tensions in the region and endangering regional peace and stability." It also went on to add that countries in the region should remain vigilant against this and avoid being coerced and used by the United States, unquote. In a news conference in Manila, the US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin stressed that with these new sites, which are not permanent, he said it's not about being permanent, but it is a big deal, a real big deal.
In terms of the EDCA locations, I just want to be clear that we're not seeking permanent basing in the Philippines. As you heard us say in our statements here, EDCA is a cooperative agreement that enables rotational activities. And so it's a key pillar of training and opportunities to strengthen our interoperability.
Carlito Galvez Jr., the Philippines Defense Secretary, declined to give the names of the locations of these 4 additional military sites. He said that the government there needed to consult local officials first before making the announcement. American officials have long eyed access to the northern territories in the Philippines, like the landmass of Luzon, as a way to counter China in the event of it attacking Taiwan. Back in November, Lieutenant General Bartolomé Vicente Bacarro of the Philippines had said that Washington had identified 5 possible sites, including 2 in Cagayan, 1 in Palawan, and 1 in Zambales, as well as 1 in Isabela. Cagayan and Isabela are in the northern part of the Philippines. Cagayan sits right across from Taiwan. The Philippines is America's oldest treaty ally in Asia. Washington is shoring up its presence in the country after relations deteriorated during former President Rodrigo Duterte's 6-year term. That term ended last year. During Duterte's stint in power, he frequently criticized America. He complained that the United States had created defense treaty agreements that heavily weighed in favor of the Americans. The Philippines was an American territory for nearly half a century before it gained independence. US officials were concerned when Duterte threatened to scrap the Visiting Forces Agreement, which was a long-held defense pact which allows for large-scale joint military exercises between both countries. He also threatened to disregard the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, which is the very deal that formed the basis for the US stationing its troops in the Philippines and having its military bases on these islands. Since he took office last June, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has sought to revive his country's traditional relationship with the United States. On his campaign trail, Marcos Jr. had indicated that he would try and forge closer ties with China, which he did by undertaking his first ever visit to a foreign country last month, to China, where more than $14 billion of deals were unveiled. Marcos Jr., the son of former dictator Ferdinand Marcos, has since said that he cannot see the Philippines in the future without having the United States as a partner. At least 16,000 Filipino and American troops will train side by side in the northern province of Ilocos Norte, which is the stronghold of the Marcos family. Those joint exercises are expected later this year. 3 decades ago, the US presence in the Philippines was a sore point for many Filipinos. The military bases maintained by Washington for nearly a century were seen as the last vestige of American colonialism. In 1992, the United States had to shut down its last American base in the Philippines after street protests, and a decision to get rid of those bases was made by the Philippine Senate. Will history repeat itself? Or has an aggressive China changed the mood on the streets from Manila to Cebu to Davao? Marcos Jr. will have to one-up his late father. His work is cut out.